We are now live.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. We might have this issue throughout today, so I apologize. Good afternoon. Welcome to, I'd like to call to order the May 24th, 2023 City of Asheville Multimodal Commission Transportation Commission meeting. My name is Dennis Wetzel, and I am the chair of this group. We are holding this meeting virtually at this time, but there are many ways for interested parties to participate in this gathering. The City of Asheville's engagement hub, which includes a variety of links and phone numbers, can be found on the Multimodal Transportation Commission page of the City of Asheville's website. Visiting this page is the best way to take part in this meeting. Members, staff, and guests, please remember to keep your microphones muted at all times when you're not speaking so we can minimize background and other feedback. I'd like to now introduce our commission members. Members, when I call your name, please let us know what interest you represent and introduce yourself. Randy Warren.
Hey, Dennis. I'm Randy Warren, and I'm also was on the Bike Ped Task Force and actively involved still in those issues, even sans such group.
Hey, Randy. Welcome. Kenny Armstrong.
Yep. Hey, I'm Kenny. I'm also on the Green White Committee.
Hey, Kenny. Jack Eigelman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Eigelman, and I am at large.
Hey, Jack. Leanna Joyner.
Leanna Joyner, I represent Active Transportation Greenways.
Hey, Leanna. Bill Loftus.
Hey there, Bill Loftus here, and I'm on the Transit Committee.
Hey, Bill. Joe Chesler.
Yes, good afternoon. Joe Chesler, West Asheville resident, retired urban planner and bicycle advocate.
Hey, Joe. Elise Mauder.
Hi, Elise Martyr. I am a pedestrian and greenway user.
Hey, Elise. Joe Archibald.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Joe Archibald. I am the liaison between Planning and Zoning Commission and Multimodal Transit Commission.
Hey, Joe. Elizabeth Likas.
Hi, Elizabeth Likas here. I am the liaison between MMTC and the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, and also a bike, greenway, and pedestrian enthusiast.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Maggie Allman. I don't know if I've seen Maggie join in quite yet. I'm sure she'll be joining us momentarily. Okay, the first order of business is to review and approve today's agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Leanna. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right, second from Randy. And any comments or questions on today's agenda? Without comments, we will do a roll call vote. Randy Warren.
Aye.
Kenny Armstrong.
Hi.
Jack Eigelman.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Joe Chesler.
Aye.
Elise Mauder.
Hi.
And I as well. Motion carries. Next item is to review and approve the minutes from the April 26, 2023 meeting as attached. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Thank you, Leanna. And a second?
I'll second. Dennis.
Thank you, Joe. Any comments or questions on the minutes from April 26? All right, without counting question, we will move on to a vote. Randy Warren.
I wasn't here, but I watched the recording, and it seems like the minutes accurately recorded the important decision-making points of the meeting. So I'll voice vote aye.
Excellent. Kenny Armstrong.
Hi.
Jack Eigelman.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Joe Chesler.
Aye.
Elise Martyr.
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is we don't have any current public comment. We did have a comment on an agenda item for this meeting that we read at the previous meeting at the request of the submitter. So that's been read into the minutes already. Without objection, I'd like to move 2 items of new business to the front. The last 2 moving to the front, and we'll move the other 2 down. So we will start with the discussion of ordinance amending section 12-53 of the Code of Ordinances prohibiting storing private property on city property. And we're getting, is that Jessica, are you presenting this?
No, Dennis, this is Ken Putnam. I am.
Hey, Ken, thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone. And I really appreciate you all bumping me to the front because I've still got a lot to do before the end of the day. So I'll set that stage. And I also apologize that it took me so long to get the staff report to you, but it was emailed to you right before lunch, I believe. So I'm assuming you all have possibly taken a glance at it. And I'll ask you this. I can share my screen and show the report if that would be helpful, as I just give some initial comments. But the main thing I want to do is kind of set the stage, and then I want to hear feedback from you. And I will say that I really appreciate Randy Warren. He and I have been communicating on this item since it came about, so to speak. And he's offered me a lot of information that I've tried, and I'm prepared to try to answer those questions. So what's your pleasure on it? You want me to share my screen, or do you just want to look at my ugly face?
Well, we love that face, but I think maybe sharing the screen is a great idea as well.
Okay, I'll do that, and then I'll probably stop sharing once I get to the questions, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay, first question. Can everybody see it?
Yeah, but I can't read it, Ken.
If we
Okay.
could zoom in a little bit, potentially.
Yes, I'll be glad to do that. Is that better? More?
I'd go bigger, Ken. Maybe even 200.
Okay, I'll try 200. How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
Much better.
Okay. I want to start with, and again, I just want to kind of summarize this, so I'm not going to go into detail on the whole report, but the action requested is to adopt a motion recommending that City Council adopt an ordinance amending 12-53 to prohibit the storing of bicycles, carts, strollers, or other means of personal transportation on city property for longer than 72 hours. So I'll emphasize here, the only change being made or asked to be made to the existing ordinance is the phrase for longer than 72 hours. So a little bit of background. The first bullet, this item was initially scheduled to go to City Council on the consent agenda on April 11th. And then it was pulled from that meeting by the City Council and referred to this committee, the Multimodal Transportation Committee, for review and consideration. As I've already said, the code itself, 12-53, prohibits folks from leaving or allowing to remain unattended personal property, and the exemption or the exception to that is the bicycles, carts, strollers, or other means of personal transportation. And again, the requested amendment is simply to add the phrase for longer than 72 hours to the exception. Then one of the questions that Randy had asked me was, how does this compare for motor vehicles? Do we have something like this for motor vehicles? And yes, and by definition, a motor vehicle, an abandoned motor vehicle is defined as one that has been left upon a public street in violation of a parking ordinance, or left on a public street for longer than 7 days. And then an abandoned vehicle can be towed or shall be towed after appropriate notice is provided, unless there's a special need for prompt action and all. So the next one he had concerns about that we wanted to talk about is storing personal property on city property has always been a Class 3 misdemeanor, which is the lowest level of criminal violation in North Carolina. and the same penalty structure exists for abandoned motor vehicles. Next, it is extremely rare that a criminal citation is issued, and it would only occur when involving persistent offenders. And I can give an example of something like that. Notice would be provided via signage affixed to or adjacent to city bike racks. And the signs would include information, contact information to learn where the removed property could be reacquired. Staff made a site visit and determined that 65 bicycle racks and 4 bicycle corrals are in place in downtown Asheville. What we observed was overall the usage is limited, so the signs would initially be installed at the bicycle corrals and then added to any other locations as the need arises. And then last, complete information regarding the policy, including how to retrieve the bicycle, would be added to the city's website, assuming this all gets approved. So with that, I think it's a good place for me to pause. I'll stop sharing now, and we can, well, excuse me, we can take some questions. Okay. And Dennis, you want me to recognize it, or do you want to do that part?
Sure. No, please.
Okay, Randy.
Well, thanks, Ken. Thanks, first of all, for a number of things. Thanks for you and the staff for pulling it from the consent agenda, because I received actually comments from a number of people saying, hey, what's this doing on the consent agenda in the first place? Because the consent agenda, I'm not sure everybody knows, but that's just stuff that doesn't get discussed in city council and just gets passed as a blanket page of things that are going on and no one ever talks about it. So I appreciate that this is being taken out of that, so we have a chance to talk about it. And I appreciate, you know, you've always been really good about this, Ken, to, you know, trying to get our input on things like that too, because I think this is the appropriate place for this kind of a change to go first before city council, just so we can make sure that it's going to achieve the goals and not inhibit multimodal transportation. So I just want to say appreciate that first. And one of the reasons why I wanted you to look at the motor vehicle comparison was, you know, in I think North Carolina State defines a bicycle as a vehicle on the road. So it, you know, it seems like that's a good comparison, and it doesn't seem like bicycles should get any less consideration than a car would, for example. And so the first thing I would say is that maybe we should increase the 72 hours to 168 hours or 7 days, because that seems like a pretty reasonable amount of time if someone was going to leave their bicycle on the street in a bike rack, not on the street, but in a public place on a bike rack, and maybe come back to use it. I would think 7 days is probably a minimum of time that I want to have for somebody to be able to realize that it's going to get taken if they don't move it. And then the notice, so a car would have to have a notice put on it. I know in Chicago we had a system where they put a tag on the bicycle, a bright yellow piece of paper that said, hey, if you don't move this bicycle within this amount of time, it's going to be removed. Even if there is a sign also saying the same thing on the wall or something next to it, because then the person, if they go out and check on their bicycle and see that has a tag on it, they can be like, oh my gosh, I was going to pick it up next week. Good thing I saw that tag, knowing that I need to move it today rather than wait, you know, a few days and have it taken. So I think that the tagging idea, just as it's done on a car, would be great to have that on the bicycle. And then the signage, so the bike corrals makes a lot of sense, but then other places as needed. So I'd never want to have a situation in which someone had a bike locked to a rack and then a sign was put up after that and the bike was taken. So we should never take a bike unless there's posted, you know, that it could be taken. So I'm not sure about how the as needed signage would work. It seems like to me we should either have signs, if the rack is going to be included in this practice, there should be a sign by that rack, no matter where it was, just so that people have good notification, because people are not going to be checking city ordinances to see how long they can keep their bike parked at a rack. And then two things I had in terms of the concerns about the cons. One was, you said potential difficulty in storing abandoned bicycles. We definitely need to have a plan in place before this ordinance will go into effect, because we don't want to take a bunch of bicycles and then not know what to do with them. So we need to make sure that that plan is in place before this is implemented. And then under the fiscal impact, it says there's no fiscal impact, but I'm not sure what the threshold has to be for fiscal impact, but certainly signage would be fiscal impact. We have to create signs and install them, so that would have a small fiscal impact. And then staff time, maybe that isn't considered because you're going to pay for the staff regardless, you know, unless you're hiring someone separate for it too. But definitely it'll take some time for someone to make signs, install the signs, then monitor the bikes, I'm not sure whose job that'll be, if that'll be traffic enforcement or who does that, or not traffic enforcement, because there is no traffic division, right, of the police department. So it might be parking enforcement that does that. But there would be some fiscal impact, although it may be minimal. I just don't want city council to say there's no fiscal impact, you know, maybe say minimal or whatever. But those are my concerns from it. But again, I appreciate you taking the time to bring this to us so we can talk about it, because this could have some significant impact on people that use the bicycle for transportation, if not on a daily basis, but and have their bike have to be not used for a little bit of time.
That's good, Randy. And just to kind of answer before we get to the next people that have their hands raised, we would definitely tag the bike itself. That's definitely true, and I will definitely change the physical impact to reflect what you just said. As far as the signs, though, one of the reasons that I did it that way too is that there's currently no type of signing that identifies when a vehicle is abandoned out on all our streets. So I was really kind of following that same pattern. And also that's why I got to that point. And I've also got down here, and by the way, when you all speak and you see me drop my head, I'm just taking notes. So I'm still listening. So I've got the note about this 168-hour suggestion. With that, then, I think I saw the first hand after you, Randy, was Joe, and then I think it was Jack, and then I think it was Joseph. So go ahead, Joe.
Hey, thanks, Ken. I just certainly want to echo what Randy said. Very much appreciate you and whoever else was part of getting it pulled from that consent agenda. Yeah, both you and, Jessica and everybody in transportation has really been great about, working with Multimodal on this. Listening to what Randy had to say, I certainly, want to echo a lot of his comments. The word that came to mind, especially related to the automobile thing, was equity. If we want to, and I think certainly this body wants to consider bikes as a form of transportation equal to a motor vehicle, we need to look at them in all kind of laws and everything as equal, right? So, when this initially came and I was looking at it on the consent agenda, I was like 3 days. Wow. So if I decide, let's take this holiday weekend, for example, I'm going to ride my bike to the bus stop, get on the bus with my bike, go to the airport and lock it there, because I know the bus isn't like, I may have to ride home from the airport or somewhere else. And it's a long holiday weekend. It's there for 3 days and I come back and now my bike's gone. It's like, ooh, that just feels really, really short to me. I realize that I'm pulling a completely unusual situation, but again, I still want to kind of go back to that equity, that if we're going to consider bikes as an equal mode of transportation, I think we really have to kind of look at it in the same way we look at, vehicles and how we determine when those are abandoned. And then the only other comment I would have, and again, this just came to mind, one is a question and then the other comment. What would be the limit of time? Like, let's just say, a bike is taken off of a rack because it's been abandoned. What then is the time period where someone hasn't come to claim it, that then it becomes essentially public property? The city then kind of owns it. And so then my comment would be, could then those bikes go to an organization such as the Bicycle Thrift Store or, one of the after school programs or something? So in other words, they're not just like scrapped at Vimco. Obviously that would be great. The city gets money, but I think that idea might be another, and again, I'm kind of like leaping. This may be another step ahead of even what this ordinance is after, but just kind of forward thinking it a little bit. So again, appreciate it all very much, Ken.
Sure. And Joe, I appreciate those comments. And to be fair, we haven't even talked about that or addressed that. I think the answer to the surplus question, though, would be that we would have to follow what those rules are. So I don't know how much flexibility we would have there. But I think that as far as the storing it, I would go out on a limb to say that we would not be rushing to get rid of these. It's just the idea that at some point in time that would have to be triggered, and we already have. We'll say, certain bikes that are stored because they're left at bus stops or they're left on the bus or whatnot. So there's a collection of bikes over at the bus garage. So, but we would if we get to all that point, we would definitely make sure we address it. Okay, Jack, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think I'm gonna second or third the 72-hour concern. I think I'd like a better argument for why it shouldn't be 7 days, the same as automobiles. That seems a little arbitrary. There might be a strong reason for it, and I'm open to hearing it. Otherwise, I think it should be more similar to cars. And I do understand. I think it sounds to me like there's, perhaps an aesthetic reason for removing abandoned or semi-abandoned bicycles and things. I presume there's also a right-of-way issue, getting in the way of pedestrians walking and wheelchairs and other things that need to use those places. Those are not super compelling to me to have a law or a reason to have a law, but I can understand them. But I guess it seems to me that we want to encourage more bicycles to use places where there's heavy traffic. And if removing bicycles that are taking up space and preventing people from using it, that to me sounds compelling. So I support the ordinance if it enables people to more easily travel downtown, park their bicycles in a safer place. But if that's not an issue, I'm not sure that it is. So I'm curious to hear, the evolution of where this, what is driving this ordinance in the first place. So those are my comments. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thank you, Jack. And to go back, this actual ordinance is really just dealing with the general topic of storing personal property on city-owned property. So that includes all kinds of things in addition to bikes. So I definitely agree with what everybody said, that actually a bicycle is a legitimate mode of transportation similar to an automobile. It follows the same laws. But in this particular case, the definition is a little bit more narrow. So they're looking at the overall ordinance as personal property, and a bike happens to be one of those items. Does that help clarify it? So really they're trying to set the ordinance up for all personal property. A bike is just one of those pieces.
And does it come from, is it from an aesthetic concern of things rusting and left over? That's where I'm not fully understanding the motivation for making the change to this. Obviously, I realize people shouldn't store property and things like that on public property and streets. So that makes sense. But I'm not sure. It seems like it might have a negative impact on cyclists, and that's my concern, or other people who might be, sort of as the situation Joe was mentioning. I'm sure there are plenty of situations where it might impact people. And so that's my concern mostly. I'm not, do the benefits, are there legitimate benefits to making this ordinance change or adding this to the ordinance?
Yes, and of course, I don't know all the answers, but going back to the history of this ordinance, and I think it was first established back in 2011 or 2012, but it was a way to make sure that the city would have the ability, if they needed to do it, to remove property that has been somewhere too long. And at that time that they did it, for whatever reason, and the exception was a good one, but they did not put a kind of a time limit on that. So it was perpetual in that case. So this is an attempt to try to correct that. Okay, let's go to Joseph.
Yes, hi, Ken. I thought you did have all the answers. That was what I was told.
Well,
anyway, congratulations to you and Randy and the others, your staff, for putting this together. I was I'm mostly concerned about blockage of passage along our sidewalks and public routes of travel. Although I understand the reason for extending the 72-hour period, I would like to see it retained. I'm worried about ADA access through many of our narrow sidewalks in the city and throughout the city. And I've seen too many examples where a bicycle is chained to a telephone pole or a bike rack where wheels have been taken off or seat posts have been removed and the frame stays there. I just think 72 hours is adequate time frame myself, and in order to keep our passageways open and free. But I appreciate the reasoning, but I do think that 72 hours is adequate. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Leanna, and I hope I said your name right.
You did. Thanks for checking. I did have a quick question. As I recall, we have some bike lockers and some city garages and things like that. I'm assuming that these are also encompassed within this ordinance.
They would be, but as far as I know, we no longer have bike lockers.
Okay, we don't have them anymore.
No, what
Okay.
happened there, Leanna, just to give you a brief history on that, if you don't mind, is that they never were used that much, and then all of a sudden they became homeless camps.
Got it. Thank you for that context and background. I appreciate that. So, I'll just offer some context from my own professional background and experience working with the Appalachian Trail, and for which we deal with a lot of abandoned property. So I'm very sympathetic to the city's concern for abandoned property and kind of the implications for that. I think more hours is probably fine. And tagging notice that ones will be removed seems like a reasonable idea. I am cognizant that it might not be possible for an area to be signed before a removal takes place, but certainly if there's a tagging that's possible before things are removed, that would help that. And then just wanted to echo, I don't even remember who said it anymore. Maybe it was Jack, but the relinquished property that has been abandoned, having a reasonable time frame that relinquished belongings can be collected doesn't place a continued undue burden on the city. I mean, it's bad enough that if it's abandoned property, you have to go collect it, but you shouldn't have to store it interminably either. And so I just recognize that storage has costs too, and we might think about a prudent way to deal with that. I don't want this committee to overlook that we did have a concern from one of our fellow citizens around the legal implications in terms of citations related to abandoned property being a Class 3 misdemeanor. And I also want to acknowledge the staff's consideration that it is difficult to sometimes identify owners of these specific items that are left behind, and makes it less likely that citations would be issued. So that does offer me some comfort, given the consideration of what we heard in terms of public comment on this item previously.
Thank you, Leanna. Let me just clarify something, because I may not have said it correctly a few minutes ago. So let's just take an example that we have determined that a bike is abandoned with, we'll say, for this example, we'll say for the 72 hours. And we get we find out about that. So we go out and we tag it. Okay. And so then we would wait another 72 hours before we would physically take it away. And that follows the same way that we do it for an abandoned motor vehicle. If we go out and tag it, we'll say on the 8th day, then we wait another 7 days, and we even put on that tag, this is when we would tow it. And then if it's gone at the end of that, or if someone contacts us and say that they moved it, then everything just drops as if it never happened. So that's what we try to do. So it's not like, well, first of all, whenever we tow a vehicle in Asheville, as far as, and this is something new for the Parking Services Division, so we are responsible to do that in most cases now, unless there's a, we'll say, an existing law that has been established more on the criminal side. That's when the police would get involved. The city does not really receive any money for that. So it's not like we're trying to make money off of it. And we use a contract that's uses a third-party vendor. We just contact that individual or that company, and then they send out whoever the next tow vehicle is. And then it becomes something between that tow company and then the owner of the item. Does that make a little bit more sense on that? And then using the example of an abandoned motor vehicle, when I told you that it could also be determined to be abandoned if it's parked in a no parking area. They're doing something against our parking regulations, and there's already a sign out there for that. The first step that we would do when we know about that one is we go out and we would issue a normal citation, just like we do downtown. And that is like for prohibited parking, and it would be $20. And then hopefully that would take care of it, and that vehicle would move and then not come back. If it's persistent and comes back and we find out about it, then we'd go through the tagging of it, the process, and so forth. There is no circumstance that our parking enforcement officers can issue a criminal citation. So that would not happen from our department. The only time that something like that would even be considered, and then we'd have to involve the police department. We did experience just a couple of months ago a situation where an individual truly had an abandoned vehicle on the street in front of his house. In fact, there was no tag on the car and other things. And so we got notice of it. We went out, put the proper identification on it, towed it on the 8th day. 2 days later, it was back in the same spot. And so that person could be considered a persistent offender. And then we might have to, take the extra step. So I hope that kind of clarifies some of those things. And I have to apologize. I'm not sure, Bill, if you were next, and I still see Randy. So you want to go, Bill?
Well, mine's just real short. I just want to respond to Joseph because he just expressed a concern saying that if the bicycle is blocking the sidewalk or, ADA access or things like that, but that's already addressed in the current ordinance. It says that the bicycle at any point in time can't be secured in such a way as to not obstruct street sidewalks and they can't, if they're going to be parked on the street or on the public right of way, they have to be parked in such a way that they are secured to not obstruct street sidewalks and not interfere with the use of city property. So your word that the 72-hour period might be adequate because it might be blocking access to that sidewalk for anybody else for longer than that, but it already can't do that as it's stated in it currently.
Thanks, Randy. Bill.
Yeah, Kenny, I know you're ahead of me, so why don't you go ahead?
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Well, I thought my question was answered, and then I realized I had another question. I too think the 72 hours thing kind of hit me, but hearing Ken talk about how that's just that's the period of time that city staff will use to ascertain whether a bike has been abandoned, and then it's tagged, and then there's an additional 3 days until it's actually removed. So I'm comfortable with that. I do think So I think Jack mentioned that it would be important to kind of clarify the rationale behind that. So if we are putting signs on the bike racks themselves, which I also support, I think explaining the rationale, like, you know, if you're not using your bike, it'd be great to make space for other bikers, and that's why we're taking action. I would also ask that there be an exemption for schools. I know my daughter has ridden her bike to school, but then caught the bus home, and then we drove her in the next day because it was raining and the bike was out for a few days. So if we're trying to encourage young folks to bike in this city, I think we should make a little caveat, at least for that.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. Bill?
Yeah, I guess I've got a couple of reactions. The first is, I mean, whatever we do, it needs, my sense is it needs to be as non-restrictive as possible, because the cycling is good, right? And we need, but we, at the same time, we need to respect the rights of non-cyclists wherever they might potentially be inflicted upon. And I got a kind of charge out of this all of a sudden that we spent 3 weeks in the Netherlands this spring, and holy cow, there's millions of bikes on us in a city, and it's hard to imagine worrying about which ones are abandoned and which ones are used. It's absolutely incredible. So, I mean, I would look forward to Asheville that has more bikes than we know what to do with, and they just all rotate around and make room for happy cycling. So I think the least restrictive is better. And what occurred to me is we're thinking about, so once we define a time, now we've got our mindset around restrictions, right? What if we just wrote it so that the city has the right to remove property if it infringes on the rights of others, period? And maybe beyond a certain time or something. But I don't like the idea of, is it 3 days? Is it 4 days? Is it 7 days? To me, there's a million exceptions to those kind of rules. And maybe it's better if we just say we have the right to remove it if it gets in other people's way or for whatever reasons. That's my reaction. I think we're pinning ourselves down and potentially creating rigidity where it's not necessary. And I think, didn't the staffs go out and say there's no real issues in all these places that were looking for abandoned bikes? Isn't that part of the report? So I'm kind of with Jack. I mean, why are we doing this in the first place? So those are my comments. I would encourage any reaction to the why do we have a time comment.
And again, I think that that is not driven not just because of the bikes, but as of all personal property that had the exemption, which includes strollers and things like that. Elizabeth, you're muted. You're muted.
Hi, I kind of want to piggyback on Bill's point, and I guess several others that have been made, starting with Jack and Randy. That occurred to me too, that I have, as much time as I spend downtown and on city streets, I have never been blocked or prevented from doing anything that I wanted to do from a bike. There are lots of other things that I think, loading trucks and delivery trucks, things like that. So I too had that reaction, is where is this need coming from? And if the staff report says it's not as big of an issue, what you just said, Ken, made me wonder if bikes should be put in a different category than those other things. People aren't riding there. We're not trying to encourage stroller ridership. And I'm not trying to be flippant about it. I'm just saying this is a very different category of transportation. And to me, that warrants some sort of separating out this other personal property. If I just want to, leave my suitcases on the side of the road versus I'm riding a bike for my transportation, and maybe I got held up, maybe something beyond my circumstances. So yeah, a little bit more of I just kept thinking of it from this pragmatic and reinforcement, psychological reinforcement. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ileana?
Just an observation that if items are collected, they don't disappear from the planet, right? Like they're stored. And so I'll speak again from my perspective. I'm a Girl Scout through and through, and consistent rules make for consistent results. the city needs something that makes a fair and equitable way to disperse guidelines that can be followed and that aren't subject to kind of the whims of squeaky wheels, which could happen with a no time limit scenario. So I think, you know, they're seeking, I think, a fairly minor change to an existing ordinance related to a time frame. I think there's been considerable thoughtful conversation around maybe extending that time period, and it seems like that might be possible. But on the whole, I think it could serve to facilitate, you know, a nicer community by not having abandoned property left behind, which I think is the fundamental and ultimate intent here. So I would support it at 72 hours or 108 hours, knowing that tagging would be necessary before removal.
And Leanna, just to be clear, did you mean 72 hours or the 168 hours?
Yes, I just looked and saw the 6 as a 0. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure that you weren't introducing a third option. That's okay.
So Ken, from kind of a legal standpoint, the city is hoping to create a mechanism to remove abandoned bicycles that it currently does not have, correct? And that's the impetus behind this. There are bikes that have been left out and the city can't justify removing them without changing this ordinance?
Yes, that's correct from the standpoint that we're just trying to close. I'm calling it in the staff report a loophole. That may not be the exact right phrase or anything like that. I don't mean anything bad by it, but it's to give the city the ability for the exception, just the exception, which includes bikes and strollers and other things similar to that, to be able to remove them after a specified period of time. That's the only change being made to it. And it does put it more in line with what we've already got for an abandoned motor vehicle process.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much, Ken. I really appreciate your input. It looks like Ken has a recommended motion. Is there someone that's interested in making that motion or another motion?
I can make an amended motion.
Sure.
So I motion that MMTC endorse and adopt a recommendation that the city council adopt. Well, it says in ordinance amending the city code. But actually, I think it's not a new ordinance, so it'd be the amending of code section 1253 to prohibit the storing of bicycles, carts, strollers, or other means of personal transportation on city property for longer than 168 hours.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy. Do I get a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Leanna. Any other comments or questions? All right, we'll go to a roll call vote. Randy Warren.
Aye.
Kenny Armstrong.
Aye.
Jack Eigelman.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Joe Chesler.
Aye.
Elise Martyr.
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Motion carries. Thanks again, Ken. Appreciate your input.
All right, thank you again for letting me go first, and good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Our pleasure. Take care. We'll see you next time.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we're going to do the same thing for the next item, which is the presentation on congestion management plan from Tristan. Tristan, are you with us? I think I saw you there. Yes.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. If it's all right, I will share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. In case you don't know me, I'm Tristan Winkler. I'm the director of the French Broad River MPO. I will warn you that I think our organization is known for speaking in acronyms, and this particular item may be amongst the most severe. So my apologies ahead of time, but feel free to stop me if I didn't clarify any of the acronyms. First of all, what is a congestion management process, or a CMP? From FHWA, it is a systematic and regionally accepted approach for managing congestion that provides accurate, up-to-date information on transportation system performance and assesses alternative strategies for congestion management that meet state and local needs. Just a bureaucratic point of clarification. We actually adopted what we call kind of our framework document in 2018. That's the document that identifies areas of congestion and looks at some preliminary recommendations for addressing congestion. And so this report that we brought to our TCC and board earlier this month, this kind of serves as kind of the data update. So the part of the CMP that is providing up-to-date data, this is what we're trying to do. And for this report, we really focused on a lot of things from 2021, in large part because a lot of the data from 2021 is just recently out. Not all of our data sources come out at the same time, so it's kind of hard to strictly focus on 1 year. But a lot of what we're going to show is from 2021, and I think kind of an important thing to look at is some of the shifts and some of the somewhat sustaining impacts from the pandemic that we've noticed in our region. So a little bit about the sources of data. First of all, it's looking at travel time reliability. So that is kind of your cell phone data and other data taken from other sources. I think there's a service provided for truckers. But either way, all the data kind of gathers information on how long it takes vehicles to move from point A to point B. So that's a data source we have access to. It covers most, but not all, of our CMP network. So just something to point out. And also another data source is the US Census American Community Survey. That is an annual survey issued through the census. And one of the things that we like to look at from that data is how people report that they primarily commute to work. This is information that's shared with a lot of sources, and a lot of sources help to highlight this. But it kind of asks people, what is your primary means of getting to work, i.e., what's the way that you use most frequently? So the important thing to point out with this data before we get into it is that it does look at how many people walk, bike, or use transit to get to work, but that's not reflective of all demand for those modes. Trips, to the grocery store or to school, that's not really reflected in this data. Also, the longitudinal employer household dynamics data, which is a mouthful, or LEHD. That's data that provides on where workers live versus where their employers are located. So, in an overly simplistic way, it's kind of looking at commute patterns, but there are a lot of caveats to consider. So telecommuting looks weird. There's around 100 people in our region who you would say commute to San Francisco. Really, they aren't flying there day in and day out, most likely, but they live here. Their job is located there. So to get into some of the takeaways from the data, one of the big ones is that travel delay is significantly down. So this data looks at the total number of estimated hours that travelers spent in traffic jams or in delay in our region. And so this looks at 3 data points: 2019, where there were more than 12 million hours spent in delay, and a pretty steep drop off in 2021. And in 2022, it went up marginally, but not a whole lot. So at least for the time being, we're seeing that delay is still not back to 2019 levels. We pulled in data on the causes of congestion. And so this looks at different causes that are assigned to congestion events in the 5-county area. And so the 3 areas where we saw pretty significant movement, first is the recurrent congestion. Think of that as kind of your typical traffic jam. Everyone, runs out of work at 5 p.m. and gets in their cars, and all of a sudden, the road is full of cars. That's what they mean by recurrent congestion. That is down big time between 2019 and 2021. However, for people who spend time on 26, this shouldn't be a surprise. Incidents in work zones, the amount of delay there went up, as well as just general work zone delays. So those were the 2 areas where we actually did see an increase in delay. But one of the things to kind of compare this to is overall vehicle miles traveled, or VMT. This is data provided from NCDOT, looking at the statewide vehicle miles traveled. And one of the things to look at is that in 2021, NCDOT estimated that the vehicle miles traveled was largely back to within pre-pandemic averages. And so we're seeing less delay, but overall, generally people driving as much as they were before. We also, during the pandemic, we looked at some VMT data that was a little more specific to our region. And for our region, we saw, especially beginning in 2021, significant increases in VMT, people starting to go out more and more as some of the pandemic concerns and other things were kind of lessened. So it's very likely that VMT in our region was either at pandemic levels or potentially slightly above.
And can you define VMT one more time?
Sure, that's vehicle miles traveled. It's generally estimating how many miles did everyone in a given area drive. So it's generally estimated using models and some other data, but it's trying to get an idea of the number of miles people are driving on the roads. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So with this travel time reliability data, we actually pull it in segment by painful segment for the identified roads in our CMP. And that again kind of tells the same story. This is one of the travel time reliability metrics, the travel time index. It's something that's used at the national level as well as a lot of other regions. But all in all, we looked at travel time index and the number of segments kind of exceeding a certain threshold for reliability. And all in all, our system is considerably more reliable or was in 2021 versus 2019. Another thing to point out is that generally our morning travel patterns or our morning network is pretty reliable. There are not a lot of pain points in, at least according to this data, in morning commutes and morning traveling. It's really our afternoon peaks where we start to see a lot more of the reliability issues. And again, I won't go too far into specifics unless you'd really like me to, but in general, red is bad, green is good. So Hendersonville Road lighting up like a Christmas tree. But again, even though the afternoon, the PM peak, which we look at 4 to 6 p.m., is considerably less reliable than the AM peak, it's still better than it was in 2019. And that goes with another metric that we look at, the planning time index. Again, morning, not as bad as the afternoon, and 2021, not as bad as 2019. Looking into some of the factors and some of the other data sets that we already touched on, one of the big trends that we've noticed from the US Census surveys is telecommuting or working from home is up significantly. It's a fun fact, I'll say a moderately fun fact, is the Asheville metro area actually had the 6th highest percentage of workers working from home in 2019. So we were telecommuting before telecommuting was cool in our area. In 2021, overall, our numbers are still going up, but a lot of other areas have caught up and then some. So we're something like 45th now. But also to point out, these are 5-year averages, so this is likely a little muted compared to what people were actually doing in 2021. But all in all, the trend is going up and going up significantly. Also to point out, it's something that's happening in all the counties across our region. Every county we looked at least doubled the number of telecommuters, with the exception of Haywood County. Haywood County went up, but didn't quite double. But you can see Buncombe County, the change in people working from home is very significant. Looking at some other things, carpooling is generally decreasing across the region, and that's something we've been observing for a while. Walking to work is largely flat. So there are variations in all of this data since it's survey data, but all in all, I'd call that a roughly flat trend. Same thing with utilizing public transit, going to work, roughly flat across the region. Biking to work is one where the trend line is going down. I will say the margin of error here is pretty significant. However, that is all in all, that is a downward trend line. Comparing all of those different modes to driving alone, the percentage of people in the region driving alone to work went down marginally, but is still on top compared to all the others, and still very far ahead of a lot of the other modes. Also, I pulled in just Asheville data just to show that the trends in the region are very much the same as the trends in Asheville. Working from home up significantly, carpooling down, walking mostly flat, transit a little bit down, driving alone a little bit down. Looking at some of the live work patterns is what I'll kind of safely call them. All in all, the big trend that we've been talking about for a while, but is continuing but stabilizing, is living and working in the same county. It's generally been going down over the last 2 decades, and we're seeing that across the board. Looking at some of the major kind of cross-county patterns that we're seeing, this kind of shows the top 15 in our region from this data set. One of the things to point out is connections to Mecklenburg and even Wake County appear to be increasing quite a bit. That is, I will just note that I don't have any hard proof on this, but there has been some research about areas that are kind of telecommuting havens being close to larger metro areas. So a lot of places that had significant telecommuting before the pandemic were places like Santa Fe, Fort Collins, areas outside of New York City. So that kind of goes along with that pattern. Also, I get asked this a lot, so just to note, connections to South Carolina and Tennessee are still relatively small. I think I'd have to pull in like the top 40 connections until we started getting into those. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick, but it's still a pretty small number compared to some of the other cross-county patterns. And just to point out, the this isn't like a point-to-point thing. When we're talking about Henderson County, this is the data showing where the Henderson County workers are going. And so it is, there's a lot of sprawl to this data. If it were a point-to-point, it would be much easier, but looking at the county data, there's a lot of nuances and more specifics to get into. But with some of the cross-county patterns, looking at the top 6, Henderson going into Buncombe County, that's more than 12,000 per day. And the increase is significant since 2002, more than doubled over that time period. Buncombe to Henderson is second at a little more than 7,000. Haywood to Buncombe, just short of 6,000, but increasing significantly. Buncombe to Mecklenburg is a little over 4,600, also increasing. Madison to Buncombe, more than 3,000, and McDowell to Buncombe, just over 3,000, but a really significant increase since 2002. To look at this from a different perspective, we looked at the change in Buncombe County worker origin. So think about it as there was a net gain in roughly 32,000 jobs in Buncombe County between 2002 and 2019. And the vast majority of that employment increase was basically reliant upon workers coming from outside of Buncombe County. I think that says a lot about what it means in our region, not just about commuting and transportation, but also what it means to be an employer and what you need to consider when you're looking at trying to get new employees. It's becoming a more and more regional dynamic there. But to point out, Buncombe's not totally unique in that. Henderson County, a smaller, but basically the same trend. Haywood County, same deal. A lot of reliance on kind of those cross-county flows. And also we can pull in information on different worker earnings. So we did look at this in a few places. Asheville's not totally unique, but I think it's the most significant. So this is looking at where do Asheville's workers who make $3,333 a month or less, where are they coming from? Where are they living? And generally between 2002 and 2020, the number of workers coming from outside of Buncombe County increased considerably, while the number of those kind of lower income earners were less likely to be coming from within the city and less likely to be coming from Buncombe County. So I think there's a lot to consider there when it comes to equity, what it means for transportation planning and transportation considerations, as well as our general regional economy. So I think that's a very significant and important trend to consider, and even going into land use considerations. Well, especially going into land use considerations. But I'll stop sharing at this point. Are there any questions for me?
Yeah, I think Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, Tristan, hi. Amazing grouping of data and some interesting interpretations there. I'm a little concerned about the gap in data for current situations, and just would hope that it sounds like you've done your best to project those findings to current situations, which always is a problem for planners in expressing data. I was curious though, in the transit component that you reported, showing a reduction in usage, how does that correlate with our ART data? Are we showing a similar reduction in utilization over time?
Generally, yes. The data that's reported to the National Transit Database, I think, has shown a general downward trend since, I think, about 2015 or 2016 for our data. And that also goes along with a lot of national trends as well.
Okay. We'll do our best to make it attractive.
I mean, I'll something I always point out when someone's ragging on art is when you compare Asheville and its ridership to other like-sized cities in the Southeast, Asheville does very well. I don't think Asheville pats itself on the back enough in that regard. I think it's obviously there's always ways you can do better, but again, compared to a lot of other systems, Asheville does pretty well in the Southeast.
Bill?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan.
My turn?
Yes.
Hey, this was great, Tristan. How low can the data get in terms of geography? Like, it was expressed a lot of times by county, right? But can it be at I'll make it up, precinct level, or how low does the data go for you to analyze?
It depends on which of the types of data. So with the travel time reliability, we pull in data that's essentially roadway lengths that are a little bit less than a mile usually. So that we can get fairly granular on. With the census data, I don't really like to go a whole lot smaller than the city of Asheville. Again, it's survey data. They aren't surveying everyone, so there's a lot of fluctuations. And when you get into smaller jurisdictions, that's when you get into things like, like Old Fort had a huge spike in, people getting to work by cab. Really, it's like one of the 20 people who took a survey most likely reported that.
I got it. Okay.
So that I wouldn't get too granular with that.
Okay, and I was specifically, the context is the to from data. Like you showed 12,000 migrants from Hendersonville to Buncombe, for example. That was what I was referring to.
Yeah, I think we can get that down to I think it's the census tract. I don't want to say block group and it ends up that I'm wrong, but I'm confident we can at least get to census tract.
But low, is it low enough for, and I guess, Jessica, maybe this is a question for you. Do you guys use this for transit planning, data like this?
Yes. Yeah, we use the census data. It's integrated into our transit planning software. It pulls from census data. And then we also look at commute patterns as well.
That's really sweet.
And demographics.
So, and Jessica, this next question I know we're considering regionalizing our planning, right? So, or at least doing a master study on a regional level. I'm trying to remember, is that Buncombe County only, or is that the whole region? Because, for example, some of these big migratory cross-county flows, we need an organization to deal with that. Would our new planning process deal with that, or is it limited to Buncombe only?
So at the moment, it's just limited to Buncombe in the city of Asheville. And one reason for that, a couple of reasons for that, one being that the MPO actually just did I'll call it like a high-level regional transit plan that looked at city transit. It looked at all of the regional transit agencies and had recommendations for opportunities. And the other major reason why our planning project is going to be limited to just the city and the county is because The city transit is the biggest one in the region. And we're looking at funding sources. And so the two big players are the city and Buncombe County. Trying to get those two organizations on the same page is the first step to getting any kind of regional system together.
Got it.
So, yeah.
So
That
I
makes sense.
understand why it is likely limited. Is it worth I mean, obviously this influx of commuters affects our scope, what we're in charge of, right? I mean, we've got what is it, Tristan? 15 to 20,000 more people coming into our town from outside our county since 2002 or something like that. I mean, it's a big number. And so they've arrived, right? What does this group need to do something to engage with another organization that can work to help create public transit for all these migrants or this influx of people? I don't mean to say that in a potentially derogatory way.
This is Maggie. Sorry to jump in. I know there's other hands, but it does bring up a question. And Tristan, you're here. It's you might know the answer. My impression is that at some point, the city of Asheville had more than 3 MPO reps, and that one of them was from the transit committee. So what I'm wondering, Bill, is since the NPO, where myself and Councilwoman Roney sit, allows us to sit with elected officials and leaders in a much larger planning region. So some of that conversation happens there, but it does make me wonder if having an MMTC liaison participate in that, is that even possible?
Yeah, so we have a rotating board seat that is supposed to represent urban transit. And so Adam Charnak, who I believe was previously on the city's transit committee, I can't remember if he was on MMTC, he served in that capacity for 2 years. And that seat, I believe, is rotating to Buncombe County. So that will be shifting, I believe, later this fall.
Okay.
I guess the root of my point is, who's looking at all these major influxes? Is there anybody responsible for it?
That was a big part of the MPO's regional transit plan, which is something that was requested by the City of Asheville board representatives a couple of years ago. If you don't remember this effort, it was right as the pandemic started, so you might have been hunting down toilet paper. But the idea of that transit plan was to look at potential commuter routes and express routes between counties. Right now, we often get requests that ask, how can I take the bus from downtown Asheville to Haywood County? And the reality is that you can get on the bus, transfer to Mountain Mobility, take Mountain Mobility to exit 37, arrange ahead of time for Haywood County Transit to meet you, and then take that bus to the Haywood County fixed route bus, and then take that somewhere within Haywood County. The cross-county transit connections, as of right now, they exist, but their convenience is such that it's not the most appealing. I've had some staff ask me why people aren't doing it more, and I say, take a day, go out there and do it. And usually they come back and say, yeah, that's crossing the county with transit as of right now is not ideal. So the transit plan that we looked at was, how could we create a regional transit authority amongst our different counties that would help supplement local services, because cross-county transit service is generally very different in terms of who it's servicing and how it's servicing people compared to local transit services.
So there's ways to do it technically, but there's been envisioned an organization to solve it, but it sounds like it's currently not being worked. Is that accurate?
I would say that the MPO board accepted the plan that was completed. There's a recommendation for an implementation plan to be done, but that has not currently been programmed.
And where can we find that plan?
That's on the MPO website. I'll throw a link in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Elise?
Hi, thank you. I have some data nuance related questions. Can you explain the difference between the travel time index metric and the planning time index metric?
Oh, you're gonna regret this one, Elise. So the travel time index looks at kind of the average travel times within a given time period versus free flow. So basically, how long does it take to get you from point A to point B, 7 to 9 a.m. versus free flow times? And so it's kind of looking at more of like your average congestion points. And the planning time index gets at it, that compares 95th percentile travel times versus free flow travel times. So that's getting into like how bad is it going to be 1 in 20 times that you make that trip? I think the way that metric has been described is what's the congestion that people tend to remember, and also I like to look at planning time index in our region. I just realized what a psycho that makes me sound like. I love looking at planning time index. But one of the things I think it gets at is that our region doesn't have a lot of network redundancy. And so when we have significant congestion events, they tend to be really, really bad. Again, especially in mornings, we don't have a lot of congestion regularly, but those congestion events where, there's a big crash on Hendersonville Road, a big crash on Merriman, those are really significant because there aren't a lot of other options for all those vehicles to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm gonna summarize now, and you can tell me if I got it right. And it might be an oversimplification, but it sounds like the time travel index is kind of like the typical that you would expect versus the planning time is like a worst case scenario.
Right. I mean, yeah, 1 in 20 times. And so the index, the measure is how much additional time do you need to budget to get through that segment? And so, yeah, the travel time index is on average, if the travel time index is 1.1, that means you should budget about 10% more time to make that trip. And you'll make, on average, you should be able to make it. And with planning time index, if it's 1.1, that means to make it 95% of the time, you need to budget a 10% more of your travel time.
Okay, because I noticed the PTIs were a lot higher than the TTIs. That was the percentage of the network that met that threshold of 1.5.
Yeah.
So we have a great number of roadways in the network that have a higher than ideal planning time index. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some, again, this is a rabbit hole I love, but one thing in the report, if you look at it, is there are a lot of areas where the travel time index is actually less than 1, which means that people are traveling faster during peak hours in some places than they do during free flow times, which I think says a lot.
Thank you.
Joe?
Hey, Tristan, thanks for all this. And yeah, definitely appreciate in advance you sharing that with Jessica to get it out, because that last slide that you showed, I actually screenshotted that, because to me, what that says is there's not enough affordable housing in Asheville. I mean, if you take that 33, that's essentially less than 80% AMI for basically any household. So, you know, it's those workers that can't make enough, where transit would be helpful, right? Because they're the ones that kind of need it, because maybe they can't afford a car also. So yeah, that I will be using that slide a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that, again, I think it's incredibly important. You know, for folks who aren't aware, outside of municipalities, there's generally not a lot of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. Well, there's not really any, especially when you get outside of the former ETJ. And so, I mean, I think the story is we're seeing a lot of people in our region shifting away from the housing burdens and instead picking up more transportation burdens. And they're moving to places where there are fewer and fewer options to do much besides drive. And again, I mean, I think to me that says a ton about land use considerations. To point out, not to throw every link at you guys, we did a land use and transportation study a couple of years ago. And one of the things we looked at is, you know, where population and jobs can go. And one of the things we looked at was, you know, if there's significantly more growth in some of our more walkable areas, then vehicle miles traveled goes down versus the baseline. Walking and biking and transit use goes up versus the baseline. The problem that we're seeing is that that's not the trend. There's a lot of work that's needed to reverse that trend. And I'll just point out that we're getting into op-ed here, but every time I see something that's like Asheville's full, I'll point out that Asheville is tied for the 33rd most densely populated community in North Carolina. It's tied with Hendersonville. In my mind, Asheville's not full, but it's getting pretty full of commuters. I think that's a lot of the growth pressures that people are feeling.
Elise? Oh, excuse me, Elizabeth.
Yes, I was really interested, Tristan, in the, I know you said if we had to get down to some of these areas where you'd think there would be a lot more commuters, it would be well past the top 6 that you showed. I think in 2 particular instances that I have done previously, and I'm curious to know where they are in this ranking, is people that are working at Western Carolina University and people that are working at ETSU in Johnson City, because they're both an hour away, but they're living in Buncombe County and they're just not the jobs to support that particular specialty area. And maybe it's minuscule, maybe that's just my world, but I just seem to know lots and lots of people that are commuting. And so those numbers weren't reflected in that, and maybe they're way down the list.
So I will say Jackson County commutes, especially Jackson to Haywood, but even Jackson to Buncombe, those numbers are pretty significant. And I'm not, and to say that, I mean, especially Johnson City and the Greenville commutes, I mean, the numbers aren't, you know, close to 0, but they are considerably lower than, especially like the Henderson Buncombe connection. I mean, that is really the big cross-county connection that we see.
And I think that in terms of planning, when you think about the fields of education or higher education, the jobs just aren't supported in our area. We have so few, and so people are moving here, living in this region, but then going to other cities to get positions that will pay them enough to then live in Asheville.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Any other comments or questions? Right on. Well, Tristan, thank you very much, as always, for your passion and your data and your presentation. We appreciate it, and you certainly gave us a lot to consider. And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, folks. And I'll send that to Jessica.
Great. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, now back to the top of the new business section of our agenda. We're going to talk about commission membership. As you will see, we're going to have 2 open positions going forward. I'm going to try to turn my camera back on and see, just in case. Hopefully I won't crash. I cannot recreate this crash anytime except for during this meeting, which is really frustrating. We have 2 positions. Pat Katz has stepped away from the commission, and then I will be stepping away at the end of my time, which is the next meeting, the June meeting will be my final meeting with the group. So we have multiple people that are interested, have raised their hands and have expressed interest in being a part of the MMTC. As you could see, one just quick note, I'm sure everyone noticed these as you're going through, is that there's an asterisk next to the folks who, when we reached out via email to verify their interest, we did not hear back from them. So with that caveat, I just kind of wanted to open up discussion about folks and the process and how we can get these 2 positions filled as soon as possible, so we don't lose any momentum.
I'm sorry to hear you're leaving us, Dennis.
Sorry, Leanna.
I said, I'm sorry to hear you're leaving.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind. Yeah, there's a lot of good folks that are interested in being a part of it, and I might be a part of something in the future, certainly, but I appreciate it. Randy.
Yeah, thanks. And we talked before about trying to find a better way to do this than we do it, but we don't think we ever established anything. So I just, in reading, I discounted the people that hadn't responded to emails saying they're still interested. Just I figured if we couldn't get a hold of them, then I didn't really want to consider them. But the people that I had 3 candidates that I thought stood out the most. Joseph Barker, who's a traffic engineer. Mike Zukowski, who is on the Greenways Committee and is actively involved now. And then Ashley Greenstein. Those are my 3 top people that I looked at. I also liked Paul Tay, his experience, but his application presentation was lacking, I thought.
Thanks, Randy. I actually had these exact same 3 folks as well that I kind of pulled out. I feel like their experience in just maybe understanding and how things are moving through, getting caught up to speed will be pretty quick with any of those candidates. Any other thoughts and comments?
Which were those 3 again?
Those 3 are, and confirm this, Randy, if I get it wrong, Joe Barker, Michael Zareski, and Ashley Greenstein.
Yep, that's it.
Jack.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I had all 3 of those as well. I did also have as a 4th, Prabhu Kanan. I thought he was also a really strong candidate. What I liked about, each of those 4 candidates, what I was looking for and I thought was strong is they all seemed to, there was each had some technical expertise, it felt like, in transportation, planning, engineering. So that's sort of what I was looking for. There were a lot of people also on that list who were super excited about, creating a better pedestrian and cycling transportation network. It seems like that's something we have a lot of. So I was really looking, I'd love to have some of that technical expertise.
Yeah, I agree. Elizabeth?
Yeah, my approach to this was a little different because I am constantly looking at trying to get as many people in the city of Asheville that want to volunteer as possible. So I think for me, if they've been on these lists for that long and really still interested and we contacted them, I kind of started from the top, and unless there was a reason, not to consider somebody, people with lots of experience in different places that can bring those ideas. I wasn't looking as much at the technical experience, but I had Shelley I don't know how you say her name. McKechnie, maybe. But I also had Joseph Barker. And I know that there are some other people on this list that are also on other committees and commissions and things like that. And again, I'd really like to see it kind of spread out to get a lot of different people rather than the same types of people. It's kind of hard to break into this. This is in the last year, the first time I've been able to be on an Asheville City Commission after having applied multiple times. And so I just think sometimes when people are interested for that long, or that it would be nice to look at some more well-rounded folks.
No, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, hi. I had a very similar process as Elizabeth was just outlining, but I had Zukoski, Joseph Barker, and Ashley Green as well. I don't know if you all were aware, Mike Zukoski, I've known him for probably 15, 20 years, back when we were both Imagineers at Disney. And Mike's quite visionary and has brought some of that thought process to his work on the Greenways and the I-26 Aesthetics Committee. I think his knowledge of what makes Asheville tick now would be very helpful to the NMTC. I would advocate strongly. And then Joe Barker, for his professional background and insight into some of the issues we address, can only help in working with Ken's staff and the transit group. So I would support those two primarily. Ashley, for her insight into the public realm and the as a PIO for Explore Asheville would of course be helpful and give a good perspective, but I don't know if she comes to the level of Barker and Zukoski. Something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten. I'll come back to it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Joe. Leanna.
I really appreciate the asterisks and kind of knowing where to help focus our attention. So I mean, we all had our own approaches. Having reviewed everyone and feeling like we have a relatively good kind of planner and transportation context and background, not only with people that bring experience from this existing committee, but also from the ways in which everybody is involved. I think I took a different approach. So I was looking toward Prabhu Kannan because of being a newer resident to Asheville and Buncombe County. It feels to me like folks who are coming with an aim to be civically engaged, we should engage. Like, that's exciting to me. And then I thought Jonathan Robinson was also quite interesting and a unique mix. And I think something we had in Tom Hunter previously, which is being a business owner here in the community. I was particularly captured by Jonathan's kind of closing statement in his application. Like, it's really about how we come together and work together. And I think that more than having like gobs of expertise, because we do have gobs of expertise even in the staff advisement that we get for this committee, people who bring the ability to think through challenging situations as one would have as a restaurateur or a contractor or a filmmaker, right? That kind of diversity of experience could be really helpful to us. And I also thought Paul Tay's background and Ashley Greenstein's background, which aren't dissimilar, would both be a benefit.
Thanks, Leanna. Yeah,
Oh, and sorry, can I add one more thing?
of course.
The only last thing I will add is that I think there are voices that our city has benefited from for a long time, serving in multiple ways through civic engagement opportunities. And it's helpful sometimes to step outside of that sometimes and open the door to new possibility and new voices. And I would encourage our group to think about how we invite new voices to the table, maybe in lieu of people who have been long-standing committed folks necessarily. So just a thought there.
Thank you. I would agree with you, Prabhu. His experience specifically to his time in serving within Austin, and I think that time Austin experienced some of the things that maybe Asheville or Buncombe County is experiencing now. So I think that perspective and going through that and seeing some of the challenges that they faced, I think could definitely be beneficial to this group and our group. Elizabeth?
Yeah, actually, just following up with what Leanna said, looking at these, I don't know by looking unless they name it in their application what they have served on or been on, and that would be really helpful information if other people have that. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill?
So just to share, my short list got down, lots of good candidates. It got down to Joseph Barker, Jonathan Robinson, and Ashley Greenstein. I'd be happy with two of those three. Mainly the same reasons everybody else has said. So I think those are good candidates. Others are too, but those are the ones that stood out for me.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I feel like this is an outstanding pool of candidates. This is excellent. And it's really good. It seems like the outreach program is working and the message is getting out to the communities and folks are hearing about it and applying. So this is excellent. So I think, Jessica, you're looking for a recommendation from us. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the city council will be considering appointments at their July meeting. I'm sorry, June, I think. June or July, I forget, but they'll need a list. And if you want, you could, I guess my suggestion would be, since we have 2 spots to fill, maybe you provide a top 3 or top 4. You don't necessarily have to rank them like we did last time, but maybe that just gives them a little bit more option to look at than just 2 people.
Great. Yeah, I like that idea as well. Given that information, is there any other comments or questions? Would someone care to make a motion? Joe.
Dennis, I'd like to move 3 individuals for consideration. I like the discussion about Jonathan Robinson's benefit that he would bring to the table. I'd like to move him. Mike Sikorsky, for the reasons I stated. Mike is also, if you're not aware, a disabled individual. So he has that perspective to offer. And then third, I'd go back to Jonathan Barker. So those would be the 3 I would put forth in a motion, if anyone would.
Joe Barker, correct?
Joe Barker, yeah, excuse me.
Thank you. Excellent. Leanna?
The only amendment I would like to make is I think almost everybody who spoke did denote Ashley Greenstein as a strong candidate. And I wonder if there's an amendment, Joseph, you'd be willing to consider that might replace one of the folks you thought of with Ashley.
Or move forward with 4 too.
Yeah, or we could add 4, but yes, friendly amendment would be fine. Yeah, so my 4 then amended would be Robinson, Zukowski, Barker, and Green. I didn't get her full name, but yeah. Greenstein.
Greenstein.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right, excellent. And so we have a motion. Can I get a second? Oh, Elizabeth, yes.
Actually, sorry, I'm probably out of order. I wasn't seconding that. I had a question about the motion.
Give a second, then we can go into discussion if that works. Anyone willing to? Okay, I got a second from Leanna. Perfect. Okay, Elizabeth, please.
Yes, just in terms of looking at gender, age, race, diversity, are there any other considerations we want to look at? Are all of these, but just putting that out there, looking at gender, age, and race. And a couple of other names that were thrown out there that I think might add some diversity that were mentioned by at least a couple of members.
Joe?
Yeah, clearly we have a very rich field to choose from. And to my understanding, these are all, these run the gamut from 30-ish to 60-ish, men and women. So I think we have a pretty good mix, but in terms of racial diversity, clearly there's very little diffusion there. Just an observation. It doesn't bother me what we currently have in the motion, though.
Joe, Archibald?
Yeah, real quick, obviously being a non-voting member, I kind of stay out of this one, but if it was, given what Elizabeth just mentioned, I had Ashley Greenstein specifically being a younger person, woman, and she's also a renter. So, slight bit of diversity, but that is always, always, always a hard one for any commissions.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. And I think Randy brought that up in the comments as well. And I agree with that. Having, renting versus owning is also really gives us some additional perspective as well. So, Kenny.
I was just wondering if it makes sense to narrow it down to 2 since we're filling 2 spots. If we send council 4, are they going to have to pick 2 out of the 4, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think to Jessica's point, allowing for a couple just in case there are some hiccups, we can still fill the roles. But I think 4 provides the council a great deal of direction and gives them, a place to start and, kind of go through and make their call. And obviously it's up to them. Everything is always up to them. They don't even have to take a recommendation, so they can move outside of these 4 as well. But we're just kind of saying, this is kind of what we feel like is a great selection from an amazing list of folks. Randy?
Yeah, when I was appointed to Multimodal, I actually interviewed with council. So I think it was a subset, but it was a lot of them, 5 maybe of the council members. Wow. So there was a couple of people that were interviewed, and then they chose from people that were recommended. So I don't know if they would do that, if they do that very often. In the past, we haven't had a whole lot of competition for these spots, and we've oftentimes just suggested the number of seats that are open. But just saying, in the history, that has happened before, where Multimodal suggested multiple people to fill a single spot, or multiple spots, more people that spots were open, and then council interviewed and then made a judgment from there.
Okay. Joe Archibald.
Yeah, just one quick additional comment. Having gone through it on the P&Z side, looking at this, I certainly would maybe include. I don't know if it's necessarily needs to be in your motion, but certainly try to include something when you move this forward to council, saying that you considered it from all these different perspectives, right? Race, age, trying to find that diversity. I think at least pushes that forward to council, that you guys did make that consideration, right? And so, you found these to be the top ones and would be comfortable with any of them, but at least hopefully that might also spur them to think about it in the same way.
Yeah, and we have Maggie's, her ability to, provide some of that nuance as well, which I think is to your point, very important. So they understand that we are trying to do our best here. And, I think it's a good spot. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we have a motion in a second. Without further comment, we will go to a vote. Randy Warren.
Aye.
Kenny Armstrong.
Aye.
Jack Eigelman.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Joe Chesler.
Aye.
Elise Martyr?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. Motion carries. Thanks, everybody. Okay, the next item, we got time, we got a little bit of time here. We're going to get it done. Consideration and appointment of a new chair and vice chair of the MMTC. So as we discussed, I'll be rotating off as following the next meeting. And lucky for us, Jack Eigelman has raised his hand and kind of said that he'd be willing to step into that role. And, I feel that Jack is a perfect fit for it. He has so much experience in town, experience with this group and the type of work that we do. So I think it's really good. And so I think that's a great addition. And then we also are potentially looking, and maybe Jessica, if you can help me out, looking for someone to raise their hand with the vice chair role. Sound right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you guys could do nominations for each. You could do nomination for chair and then vote on that, and then do a nomination for vice chair. And of course, Randy, if you still wanted to be vice chair, you could nominate yourself. I think, whatever you guys feel comfortable with. And just to reiterate, it's not a huge extra time commitment. You meet with me a couple weeks beforehand, before the meeting, for about an hour or so to go over the agenda, and that's about it. So it's not a huge extra lift. We really appreciate somebody stepping up. And thanks, Jack, for being willing to step up to that role.
You're welcome.
Leanna?
Is the vice chair, does it hold responsibility, or is it simply the position that is the successor to the chair? And what are the kind of duties and responsibilities of the vice chair?
The crown is
it's not necessarily. It's not necessarily successor. It's just more like the backup. So if the chair is out, you would be the vice chair would be the one that would run the meeting. But both the chair and the vice chair meet with me to help with the agenda setting.
Excellent. With that, I'd like to, maybe we can break these out. I'd like to nominate Jack Eigelman for the chair position of the MMTC.
I'd like to second.
All right. We need a vote here. Jessica, what do you recommend?
Let's do that. Why not?
We got a motion and a second. We're going to go through the roll call vote. Randy Warren.
Aye.
Kenny Armstrong.
Aye as well.
Jack Eigelman.
Aye.
Leanna Joyner.
Aye.
Bill Loftus.
Aye.
Joe Chesler.
Yes, aye.
Elise Martyr.
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. And so that motion carries. Excellent. Congratulations, Jack.
Thanks for the confidence, everyone. Looking forward to serving.
Right on. Okay. So is anyone, Randy did express that he's willing to stay on, but he's also expressed his willingness to give someone else an opportunity. Kind of whatever there is an opportunity, if someone's interested in, stepping in and taking a shot at it, you're certainly welcome to do so. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I did that with Jack offline.
If
Did I nominate Randy?
If you want to think, so I'm happy to be vice chair again. I don't take the chair opportunity usually because my schedule sometimes prohibits me from being able to be giving enough of my time, I think, at certain times of the year, but I'm happy to be vice chair. But again, at the same time, perfectly fine. If someone else wants to take it, I'm not okay with that as well too. If someone wants to wait though and think about it for another month or two too, that's fine too, because I still have another year, I think, on my rotation. And so we could transition at a later time or now, either way. But if you want to take time to think about it, I'm okay giving up that position at any time in the next year or two.
Okay. It seems like that makes sense. We can table it for now. Does that work with everybody? And, approach it, everybody can think about it if you're interested, and you can raise your hand next month or a couple of months, something like that. So does that work with you, Jessica?
Yeah, that's just fine with me.
All right. Well, we are through our items. Please note.
Hey, Dennis.
Yes, please.
Excuse me, Randy, when does your vice chair role expire, or is that?
Well, I think my second term on MMTC expires next summer. So the vice chair is an ongoing until, you know, we decide to change that. But so the vice chair doesn't, I think, has a defined period necessarily, but my term on multimodal does.
Thank you.
Since I've been here, we've tried to have a new chair, vice chair every year. And I think this year in January, nobody was comfortable. So Dennis and Randy added on an extra 6 months or so, which is why we're at June, July right now. But there's not like a rule. It's not in our bylaws or anything that there's a time limit, but we've just tried to kind of give other folks an opportunity if desired.
As always.
So,
Great.
and I'm happy to wait, and I'm also happy to talk with anybody offline if they'd like to get more information and not feel like they're on the spot. I'm happy to talk to anyone who might be interested.
Yeah, and me too. If someone wants just to know what's going on from the vice chair perspective too, I'm happy to talk to anybody too. Just let me know.
Great. Okay, please note our next meeting, June 28th. We also have future agenda items on there. If you needed anything added to that list, just let me know, myself or Jessica or Randy, we can get that added onto it. And there's also documents. If there's any missing documents on that from that list, let us know. We can get those added as well. And without objection, we can adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Ayes have it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
I didn't crash again.
Thanks.